Hello! You've read the title. I need to do some explaining, I'm sure you can imagine. First and foremost, I should mention that my eyesight problem, so I was visually impaired for more than 10 years, but I tend to say 10 years because it's easier to describe. I had a visual impairment that was as a result of the way my brain processes vision, as opposed to there being something directly, organically wrong with my eyes. That is the first thing that should be noted here. This was a functional condition. This was a processing problem. This can be covered under a number of brackets. So I've been considered to have visual processing disorder, Mears-Erlins or scotopic sensitivity syndrome, and also visual snow. I was considered to have all three. I also have one pupil that's significantly larger than the other, but that is quite benign, so there's no reason to worry about that, and it's still present now. When I refer to myself as visually impaired, I know that I started noticing things going missing in my line of vision at 11 years old, and now at 26, I can cross roads by myself, and that is something that has been all those years in the making. From 11 to 19, I saw myself get progressively worse and worse and lose the ability to do things that I once could do, or finding it increasingly impossible to develop the independent skills that I needed because I hadn't learnt things when I was younger, and it was becoming more and more difficult to establish those in adulthood. However, from 2020, where I was 22 years old, to now in 2024, I decided to go on a journey to find out if I could actually teach my brain how to see and process vision. This started in the pandemic, as many things did. I had time to sit down and get to grips with what was wrong with me. My eyesight conditions were likely a result of quite nasty migraines that I suffered from 10 years old to 18, and then I saw significant reductions in the number of migraines, so sometimes once every 3 years after that, and they were very benign in comparison to what they were. So I saw a chance at this point to try and get my vision back. I saw that my condition in general had somewhat stabilized, and I was now going to retrain my brain to get my vision back. How was I inspired to do this? I actually spoke to a GP, a doctor, who was very interested in functional conditions. She mentioned extremely briefly to me in passing that there might be some evidence to suggest that you could train your brain to undo some of these pathways that it goes down that are not functional. That was a very strange description, and it probably doesn't nearly cover what she had in her mind, but she wanted to mention something in passing. So she said, at the moment your brain isn't processing things well, but it could if it used other pathways. The best way to do that is to train your eyes. You could try. And that was the last I heard from her. That was the last I heard of the situation. I have no way of contacting her and telling her now that in fact it was her inspiration that has in part brought back my vision today. Her one piece of advice was actually to do with my visual memory. I could go somewhere, see a place, close my eyes, and I wouldn't be able to see it. Now, for a lot of people, they have this, but for me, it wasn't normal. I used to be able to have a very strong imagination full of pictures, and now I didn't have anything. I couldn't remember the faces of my family members. I'd sort of see part of them. Their face would be just blurry in my mind. My brain couldn't ascertain, hadn't focused enough, and hadn't been able to see enough to really remember people's faces. She said to me, could you try looking at a flower and then closing your eyes and trying to imagine the flower? Or at least trying to point out aspects of the flower. For example, Yes, I remember it was pink. And then trying to encourage my brain to process enough information to create these images. I spent a little bit of time doing this, but didn't see much improvement. I would go out into my grandparents' garden and I would look around, and you see my grandparents have such beautiful flowers and such an array of them. It was a good choice. I'd look at the honeysuckle and I'd look at it, close my eyes, sort of roughly see something, and within seconds it was gone. So I thought, don't know what to do here. So I went to the roses and I did the same thing. And I didn't actually see any improvements. So I thought, well, hang on a minute. Maybe it's not about the fact that I can't remember what it is I've seen, but actually that I'm not truly seeing yet. And so there's nothing to remember. That was my most potent comment that I made to my family and friends. I don't think I'm seeing enough in the first place in order to have any visual memory of something. I think I need to start with the seeing. So I had a brainstorm for a good amount of time, probably for a month, where I thought, what is it that I can personally do to activate perhaps a different part of my brain to be involved in my seeing and in my vision? Now, I'd learnt languages from a very young age, and so I knew that that aspect of my brain was very well developed, not just from a young age, but sometimes language capacity doesn't develop later on in life unless you've developed it very young. So I knew I had it, and I knew it was very strong. I could pick up languages very quickly, I could sing in different languages. There was something there to work with. So I thought, well, how about I completely remove the English alphabet from what I'm doing and change to a whole new alphabet and treat it as a series of patterns that I have to try and see. So I needed a form of writing that I knew nothing about, had no concept of, that I could begin to learn about as if I was learning to read and write from scratch. I chose the Mandarin alphabet. It's complex. It has many lines, and some of those lines must bend a bit, some of them must be very straight. They must be drawn in a certain order. There was a lot here to work with, and that was perfect for me. In English, I was writing so scruffily, to be honest, a lot of it wasn't legible. So this wasn't of much use to me. I got myself a whiteboard, a large one, whiteboard markers, and then just some tissue to clean things off. And I downloaded a course in Mandarin. Then I'd take the individual letters or characters or radicals, and I would write them down on little business cards. So there was a set of business cards from a long time ago that were in the family and nobody had used, and the back of them was completely plain. So I'd take the business cards and glue them together so that the completely plain sides were on both sides, and I had flashcards. Because bear in mind, in the pandemic, we didn't particularly want to be going out. Amazon had a wait time of months, didn't it, for a while? So I just thought, look, I'm going to be resourceful, and that's what I did. During this time, I was writing the characters on each side, and on the other side, I would then write what it was so that I could just generally know how to refer to it among all the other characters that I had at this point. And I would check with someone to check that the character that was on my screen was the same as the character that had been written down. So that I needed a lot of help for. But what I did then is I took these cards and I would flip them over to the name of that character, like Ni. So Ni is formed of actually two characters very close together, but that means you. So I knew what it meant and what it was, and I could use then my visual memory to try and draw it on my whiteboard. So I'd see the English translation and the name of this character in Mandarin, and that would sit in front of me, and then I would try from memory to draw the character that I remembered should be there. So at first I started off by just writing the characters and having help writing the characters themselves by actually looking at the character and then literally drawing what I see, which was forcing me to process what I was seeing, a line here, a line there. And if there was a section missing, I knew that that was a part of my vision that needed help. And so I continued to do this. I had to do this in pretty much total darkness. So I would start working on this about 9 p.m. and I would stop working on this about 3 a.m. because there was absolutely no way I could have any sunlight or any natural light coming in while I was working, otherwise I would just get sick. So I needed to literally work only in the dead of night. Which is a very interesting experience, I have to tell you, because you become very isolated. Like, that's all you can do is train yourself to see without having any idea whether it's going to work. So I kept this up and I continued to look at the translation of the character and then try to remember what it was I saw of that character and just try to get as much as possible. I found that there were aspects of my brain that could have an inkling as to what the character should look like. And I wouldn't always listen to it at first because it was very hinted. And I found that those hints were actually signs that my brain was processing. Those hints were actually processed information. And I had to listen to that very carefully, and then that grew stronger very, very slowly. Then I was going out with a white cane. So a white cane is a really long stick. I would get one out, but I'm sure you've seen one. And blind people use them to get out and about. And there's a ball on the end that moves, and you swing it along like this, and it stops you from bumping into things. And I would cross roads, again in the dead of night, with a friend or family member present. And I would just cross empty roads. So I was not very good at it, and I tripped up a fair bit. I didn't have a lot of courage. I was very emotional. Often it wasn't working as quickly as I'd hoped, but I also had an inkling that this wasn't going to be a very simple process. There were days I could do nothing. There were days I couldn't even get out of bed, and I actually found out that I could still sit there with the flashcards from bed with a torch, which provided some light but not too much that I was going to feel unwell, and I could sit and go through these. I then noticed, probably 3 or 4 months later, and I was doing this pretty intensively, I was just living to learn to see. There was very little else going on, too much time in the sun, and I'd be like, oh, I am in so much pain, I'm going back inside. And I studied a bit of music just to keep me going. And then I decided to take some courses in etiquette. And being the pandemic, you can imagine, it was very easy going. It was just on a Zoom and there was a lot to learn. And I made a point of note-taking everything. But I was note-taking really scruffily. I mean, really scruffily in English. But as I was still practicing the Mandarin, I noticed that certain letters I was writing were actually quite reliably in place. I went through this etiquette course and I must have written 10 pages back to front, which is just absolutely without it. That's beyond the capacity I thought I had. I thought I had the capacity to read and write about 2 sentences and then I'd need to rest for 2 weeks. That was the average before I started training myself. There really wasn't a lot of capacity in me to write more than a few sentences on Instagram or something like that. That was really me done. So I thought, hang on a second, have I just done that? And then I thought, but it's really scruffy. Could I write it neatly? And then I wrote those 10 pages neatly. For the first time, probably since I was 15, younger, 12 perhaps. And it somewhat shocked me. I'm 22 years old at this point, just turned 22, and I'm completely flabbergasted at myself. Have I just taught myself to do that? And then I thought, right, if there is a shot in hell of me making this, I'm doing it now. So I doubled down on what I was doing on my work. I then started to study a little bit of mathematics, some physics mathematics in orbital mechanics. Again, almost something so difficult to understand that it put my brain into a whole new world. And that was really good because it didn't have its usual pathways. There wasn't any words I was expecting to read. Everything slowed right down. So this was really good, but I stopped with it because there was a lot to do with the Mandarin characters still, and I was also picking up English again very, very well, and I wanted to keep that up. So this continued for a good while, and then I thought, right, now I need more stamina, because 6 months down the line of doing this, I actually didn't have much stamina to go outside in daytime because I'd been the entire time in darkness. And it took a few years for me to recover from that because I was already photophobic. That means I already found light painful, and now I wasn't used to it. By this point, it was the end of summer, sort of August, September, and I could only make it probably 100 foot from my house in daytime, about that, which was devastating. I really wanted to do better than that, and actually very quickly I gained the physical endurance, but not the eye endurance. I still struggled. Even in winter, I was really needing to close the curtains a lot. I was needing to sit in the dark a lot. But on the flip side, as I was writing these Mandarin characters, it used to just be one on this huge whiteboard, and now I was able to write a few in a line, and they were neat, and the line was straight without using a ruler. These were all signs that my brain was able to process the size of the whiteboard, how many words I could fit on that whiteboard with the size of writing I was doing. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. This continued for a while, but then I saw some minor regressions. I'm not convinced what those regressions were. I think it could also be that I was going between the brightness of daytime and then the complete darkness of where I was studying at home, usually in my room, and I was feeling more blind when I was in the darkness at home. I'm not completely convinced that anything actually regressed, but I lost confidence. I then started working on some community projects, like a community fridge, and I only went at nighttime. And I would go and organise all this food and sort all of these things, because sorting the foods, their oranges, their lemons, this is differentiation with my eyesight that I needed to learn to do. So I set about that, and I would cut open the satsumas and I'd put those all in there, then cut open a tomato set and put them in there, and I'd be organising things. This was really good, but I could only do it at night. So when it came towards the summer, I would go 2 hours later and I'd be starting work at 11 p.m. and I'd only be there for an hour, and that would exhaust the hell out of me because I'd had the strip lights on in there, which were very slightly flickery. That was too much for me, so I could only do an hour a week, if that, and I kept it up nonetheless. I did it anyway because it was all worth it to try and figure out how to do this. And then about 6 months on from that, so we're talking like maybe a year and a half almost from when I started training my eyesight, I noticed that I could go to the community fridge without my sunglasses and still have the strip lights on. I felt a little bit sick towards the end of that hour, but I did it and could do it. But when I was coming back from that and when I was going there, I was walking into cyclists almost, my friends. I have friends with me the whole time at this point. They're pulling me out the way of things, stopping me at curbs. I'm nearly walking straight off the path. You know, I am really still not seeing in my environment. So although in handwriting I'm improving, in my environment there's pretty much no improvement. I'm still mainly in the dark. I'm still feeling pretty sick, but sometimes I'm slightly less photophobic and that my eyes are hurting slightly less, which was something to hold on to. Then I was sitting in my room for about a month, just thinking and imagining an interesting scenario, and I thought, oh, what a fun What a fun universe that would be to live in. It was sort of a magical Scottish universe I'd come up with in my mind, and I thought, well, hang on a minute. This is a whole story. What if I look at this from the perspective of Sir Chris Bonington, who said, I'm not going to make it to the top of Everest. No. I'm just going to take a step, and then another step, and I think I'll take another step, and then somehow he makes it to the summit of Everest. That's a vast oversimplification, but I took the mindset nonetheless. And I thought, well, what if I could just write down what it was I saw? So I started with just writing down, and I'm using an iPad. I'm in total darkness for another month, where I'm making all of the words magnified very, very big, and I'm just writing out all of the individual things that happened. And then I wrote chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and I thought, well, I can separate it into chapters. That's a good start. And then I thought, well, what should I do next? Well, I should use some connectives and bring things together. So I very carefully put my connectives in and sorted that. And then within 2 weeks, I had written a story. Further 2 weeks from that, I had had it checked over by those around me, and I have lots of people in my life who have a good literary understanding, and I decided to publish it. Why did I decide to publish it? Because it was perfect? No, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could write a book, because that was something I couldn't even have dreamed of between 11 and 19. In fact, no, I couldn't have dreamed of between 11 and the moment I decided to write that book. So there was no concept within me that this was possible. So I thought, I'm going to self-publish it. And I did. And I sold it locally, and it was all very jovial, and it was all very sweet. It was 25,000 words in total. Then I wrote a second fiction book. I got very stressed, and I ended up getting a bit sick. I was starting to sometimes write in the living room next to my friend. The light was coming in, and I realised I was typing away all right. Everything was still very magnified on there, but I managed to get to about 45,000 words, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, that's double what I wrote before, and I'm still keeping up with these Mandarin characters, just writing them each morning. Still going, sometimes for hours, because it really took that kind of time sometimes to get my brain to work. It was a very slow, very arduous process. Then I released the first part of my two-part series. This two-part series here. It was 90,000 words. Part of it was a digitalization of Babbage's works, and then the other half was my work, which would have been about, I think, 50-something thousand words. So again, a little bit more than the book before. When I published that, I realized that actually I didn't need to magnify my iPad. I just wrote it normally, and I could also write on my phone, and as you can see, my phone's only so big, so you can only get the letters so big on here. Although they were magnified, they weren't as magnified as they would have been on the iPad once upon a time. And on the iPad, I was functioning without it magnified pretty much at all. So then I thought, well, I should definitely try to understand how I can deal with my environment. Interestingly enough, I went to London and I visited a friend. I went to a bar, had a drink, and then I walked around some gardens. It was late August, so I think I arrived there about 7:45. Kept my sunglasses on until it went dark fully. I was quite anxious of not doing that. And then I went to the gardens, I sat in the gardens, I had good conversations, I felt well. I came back, and a month after that, I said to my other friend, I know exactly where I went in London. I remember exactly where I've been. I sat on a green chair and I went here and I did that and I saw this and I saw that, and I can picture it in my head. I can see it. I genuinely can. My friend said, well, then we go to London. So we go to London and I walk him to this bar and I say, look, that's the chair I sat on. This is the other area. That's where the toilets are. That's where the bar is. That's where this is. That's where that is. And I point everything out. I then come out of the building, walk around, and manage to find my way to these gardens. This was absolutely unbelievable. This was not something I was known to be able to do. I'd been to London with somebody a few months previous, and they'd picked up that I could see some things that maybe I hadn't assumed I'd be able to see. And I found it a bit strange, but this time I'd gone, and I was absolutely adamant I knew where I'd been. And when I saw the green chair, for example, it looked the kind of green I remembered. It had the same shade, it looked similar, and I could see what parts of the bar had been changed in that month. Oh yes, they've got a little divider there. They didn't used to have that. And that chair's moved from there to there. I know, I remember. This was absolutely momentous. We didn't know I could do this. And every now and again, when we weren't walking near a road, I was walking slightly in front of my friends. This is completely unheard of. I used to grab onto my friends, hold onto them, almost lean on them a bit much, almost give them a strain in their shoulders, because I would constantly be holding onto them like this as I went anywhere. And I'd be holding onto them for dear life because I didn't know where cars were coming from. If I wanted to cross the road, I felt like I didn't know when they were crossing because my periphery wasn't processing at all. And now I was starting to almost skip slightly in front of my friends and say, oh yes, and down here's that, and down here's that. This was absolutely unreal. Now, during that Christmas period that came next, which was this last Christmas, I was still very much hanging out in the dark because it was winter. There weren't any tests. I wasn't going around all the time with my sunglasses on because it was dark most of the time. So there wasn't the pressure to improve. But then, as the daylight hours increased, I realised I could do more. I'd founded an astronomical group so that I could go stargazing with people and do that, because that's something you can do in the dark, right? So that was something I could manage. We had a lecture at one point, and I still can't read lectures. I still can't see, you know, the big PowerPoints they have on those big screens. I still don't have the ability to read those. It's very, very painful. I've been to 2 lectures this year, and I've not been able to read anything of either of them. That is something I'm going to have to train separately for, and I'll manage it all right, I'll get there. I think actually a very recent course I was on only weeks ago, I actually saw bits. So there's something there, but it's just not functional enough for example, if I were to do something important like CPD, you know, continued professional development, I would need to see a lot more of a PowerPoint than what I'm seeing now. So I'm not going to consider that something I can do. Sorry about that, still working on it, will have to train it. Probably would have to sit there with somebody with a big screen and actually try reading words off of it with all the glare and, you know, the room lights will shine on it. There's a lot going on there. I don't know how I'm going to go about that, but I will. And during this time, I then in the March time, so just this March, went to Switzerland. And I thought, because the village we were staying in was very quiet. So instead of at night time crossing roads, I was now at night time crossing roads without my cane, and also crossing roads during the day when it was very, very quiet, and doing my best to achieve that then and there. So, what did I need to do to get to Switzerland? Well, I still used special assistants at the airports, so I was still escorted to my plane, I was still escorted off, but I was taking a route I've been taking since I was a tiny child, and I follow it verbatim. I can't fly to a different airport, and I can't fly from a different airport. I have to do everything the same. And if the check-in desk, the special assistant's check-in desk moves, I'm lost. Right, so there are things that had to be in place at that time for me to get to Switzerland, but I did put my cane down when I got on the coach to go to the airport. I put down the white cane, folded it up, made sure it was in my luggage in my hand luggage in case I needed it, and I took that journey without it. I was able to walk across the train station, I was able to look up and see where my train was coming in, and then get on that right train, getting all my stuff on the train, etc. All of this worked, all of it was functional. I had never been to Switzerland alone without my cane, but it's important to note that because I've never had any visual memory of the airports, I still don't know how to get around them. just on my own. So I still have to go to the special assistance desks, and I still have to ask for help because I don't have quite the intricate orienteering skills that you would need for that, because I still struggle, right? You know, this is not something that just clicks into place. My environment learning is slow. Then I came back to England and I crossed my first road that actually had cars on it in more numbers than one. So, you know, I had to look both ways, I had to look carefully, I had to assess it. I took a very long time to make my decision, and I also used my ears as backup, as I've been trained to use my ears to cross roads, for example, when I'm with a white cane. You learn to do these things, so my vision had to match what I was hearing before I would cross. So I was using slightly more senses than I had available before. And then I just kept doing it because I didn't want to stop. So I kept doing this and repeating crossing these roads, and then I'd cross a road and go to the train station. Then I'd take the train somewhere and then ask somebody to come and get me from there. So I built my routes up, and I continue to do this and continue to do this and continue to do this, and I'm also continuing to write. Then I decided to take a course in mental health first aid. I took the course, I hand wrote all of my notes for the course, which are sitting in that beautiful folder there, and I passed the course. I was able to do all of the assignments, I was able to answer all the questions, I had no trouble. These were things that were impossible 10 years ago. And I thought, well, by golly, I've just written how much? I mean, it took me a good amount of time. I took my time with it, and I had to focus on it above everything else. So I couldn't just do it on the side. You know, this was something that was going to take a significant amount of energy. So I kept up the writing, I kept crossing roads, it kept going places, and then I realised I'm practically completely independent. I can take myself anywhere I want to go. I was visiting new hospitals to volunteer at, and I was finding my way around, going to showcases and then coming out and finding my way. My family would be parked outside. Was it all right? Yes, it was. I've survived, I've managed, I've been all right. And sometimes if I overdid things ever so slightly, my energy level was sturdy. It didn't just drop like it usually does when one has a chronic condition. You know, you slightly overdo it and your body just crashes for 2 weeks. That wasn't really happening. I still have a number of days where I'm significantly less productive. I mean, significantly less productive. And I try to switch it up with something else. So if I can't write, I try to do music. If I'm not feeling like music, then I might sit down and try and write. So I have lots of different things that I do, so that I'm always trying something, because one aspect of me gets too tired and I have to switch. And that's all right, because actually it means that I'm gaining lots of different skills. So I'm not mad at that. I don't have a problem with it particularly. But then I calculated that it took me about 1,000 to 1,500 hours to regain my eyesight to what it is now, which is not fully sighted as you might be if you are a sighted person, but it's enough for me to do pretty much everything that you do. And I realised, actually, with the help of an very interesting person at the Royal National Institute for the Blind, the RNIB, that actually it took me as long to regain my eyesight as it would to become a British Airways pilot from no experience. And that gave me a real shock, because I realised just how hard it was. I was just going about my journey because I knew I was going to be visually impaired anyway. Heck, I might as well try and get some vision back and try something. And then all of a sudden I'm sitting here able to see. Now, of course, it's very difficult because everybody I meet now has absolutely no idea I didn't used to be able to see, and they don't realise how much energy it takes to do these things. It turns out that being sighted is exhausting, because having to see everything, getting my brain to process, getting it engaged is so fun, and there's so many new things to experience. But it's also a bit stressful, because you do not want to be making mistakes at the wrong point, and you don't want to be going on these journeys and then forgetting where you were. I visited the Royal Society of Medicine at Wimpole Street, and then I had to make my way back through London. I'd walked a way that a security guard had told me to walk through London to find it. And then when I came back, I was shocked at the fact I didn't need a map or any help or any... Because we have... It's not Seeing AI, it's the other one. There's an app essentially that we can use as visually impaired people, which tells us where we are and what's ahead of us. So it'll say there's a junction in 30 feet or something. On your left is W.H. Smith, etc. I didn't need to use any of these things. I just walked and thought, that street. I walked down there. Yes, right, I'm going down there. And I'd go down there, I'd walk, and then I'd suddenly see, oh yes, that's my station, that's where I need to go. And then I'd go there. I was absolutely amazed that I could do this at all. I mean, this was just an incredible experience. And at the Royal Society of Medicine, I was very surprised. I sat in the library for a little while. I read some magazines. I haven't read magazines since I was 10, probably. And just sitting there reading magazines. I didn't read the whole thing cover to cover, but I read a number of articles. And I was amazed at myself and surprised at myself that I'd managed this. So that is my experience. That is how I got my eyesight back. Hours and hours and hours of repetitious behaviour, and also the ability to see improvements in my vision and actually to put them to the test, which is terrifying, and I did it. Very proud to say that I've done it, but I'd like other people to get better from my condition too. So I'm also kind of looking for people, particularly friends of mine. I have some friends who have the same condition, really interested in seeing whether I can help them to see too, because if I can, then this is a strategy. This is not a fluke, this is not an accident, this is not a coincidence. If I can make somebody else better, maybe a third person better, there's a sign that there's something to be had here. And if I can do that, I shall publish a case review just so it's of use. And I'll work closely, or continue to work closely with the RNIB to discuss about eyesight recovery, because it's an extremely traumatic process, and you can see about that in a previous video I've just made yesterday that explains some of the mental health concerns around recovery, because it's actually very difficult to recover from. It's funny, isn't it? You'd think it's difficult to go blind, but it's very, very, very difficult to recover. Everything's down to you that you have been told for years is unsafe for you to do. It's a massive mental block to overcome. It's a bit like somebody giving you cyanide and saying, well, you've been vaccinated, now you can have the cyanide. You look at the cyanide and you think poison, right? Your brain makes that an immediate assumption. You can cross a road by yourself, you think danger. And that's so hard to overcome. I can't describe, but it is possible to do, and it takes courage. And I don't know what will happen next. Will my vision continue to improve? Will it stagger sometimes? Perhaps I've gone too fast. I'll have to slow down again. Perhaps, who knows what will come next? But if other people can get better, all of this was worth it. And I'm glad to be here doing what I'm doing and explaining things in the way I'm explaining them. But yes, you may never have had a disability in your life, and so this must be a very strange thing to hear about and to come across. But I hope that you see that actually in life there's always hope for whatever you want to achieve, but perhaps enjoy the process more than the end result. Because no matter where we are in life, some disabilities can be overcome and some of them can't. And that's actually quite all right. There's no issue with that. But actually enjoy the process of developing skills in your life and see where it leads. So that's a very brief overview of how I became me today, a sighted person. Thank you so much. All the best.